Hello and welcome to Human Ascension with Ellie. So, let me begin immediately by asking you a question. Why are you here listening to me right now? Why? Why aren't you doing something entirely different or listening to someone entirely different? Why aren't you asleep or eating or out at a party or shopping or ironing or walking your dog? And why do I have my dog on a t-shirt claiming that she'd be a great president? Are these all really dumb questions after all? You're here because you've decided to be here, right? Really? And I'm wearing this t-shirt because I've decided to. Are you sure about that? Are you absolutely certain? Or are you here because you've been pre-programmed to be here? And if you've now at this very moment decided you're going to prove me wrong and that you're not pre-programmed and you decide to leave, are you doing that because you've been pre-programmed to do that as well? And am I wearing this t-shirt because I've been pre-programmed to do so? The Los Angeles Times recently picked up a story about a Stanford University neuropsychologist by the name of Robert Sapolsky, who you may have heard of because he's been doing the rounds all over social media at the moment. You may have seen an interview or heard a podcast interview with him, maybe even more than one recently. Robert Sapolsky has been conducting behavioral studies on chimpanzees, baboons, and other kinds of primates, including humans. And he's been doing it for around 40 years. As a result of that, he's concluded from those studies that humans do not have free will. In fact, what Robert Sapolsky has concluded, according to the Los Angeles Times, and a variety of interviews that I've seen with him, is that the choices that humans make, regardless of whether they're minor, like making yourself a cup of coffee, or major, like deciding to donate a kidney or something, are beyond our control. Robert Sapolsky says that we've been pre-programmed to make all of the decisions that we make, and that our pre-programming goes back as far as our time in our mother's womb, and maybe even further back than that. It goes back, according to Robert, to when our mother was in her mother's womb, or even further, to when our mother's mother was in her mother's womb. So according to Robert, the choice to be here listening to my voice today is no more than a complex series of learned behaviors that have arisen from our unique experiences since conception. And every decision we make, whether it's to stay or to leave, is exactly the same. Everything from where and how we were born, our nutritional intake, the behavior of people who cared for us as children, the experiences we've had, the knock-on effect of other decisions that we've made over the years. Nothing is by chance, according to Robert. Nothing is our decision, nothing. We are simply playing out the role that has been determined by us as a result of whatever happened to us before this very moment. So the man who gives his fortune away to a good cause has nothing to be proud of, really, according to Robert, because it wasn't really his decision. He was predetermined to give his money away. And that's because determination is the basis of reality. And the man who opens fire in a crowded theatre, killing 100 innocent people, has nothing to be ashamed of either, because once again, it wasn't really his decision. He was predetermined to kill everyone that he killed, and his victims were predetermined to die that day, because determinism is the basis of reality. That is Robert Sapolsky's view. So, what is determinism exactly? Well, the theory of determinism relates to the idea that events are determined by previously existing causes. Determinism theory states that everything is caused by something else, and therefore everything we think and believe and do, and everything we don't do, is predictable. Determinism theory also states that free will is an illusion. There is zero free will, according to determinism, or the determinism theory. And everything that happens is and always has been inevitable. So, last week, when you accidentally dropped a glass in your kitchen and it landed on the floor and shattered, for example, it wasn't because you were distracted or because the glass was slippery or you were having a clumsy moment. It was inevitable. It was predetermined. And that meeting in the past that you arrived late to, well, that was predetermined. There was no point trying to get there on time because it was predetermined that you would get there late. Okay, I'm going to stop right there for a moment and tell you about something unusual that happened to me 6 months ago. And that's the reason why I'm actually talking about free will today. I've often wondered about it because it was a very strange occurrence. Okay, I was out with my dog and I stopped to get a takeaway cup of coffee. It was a beautiful, lovely day. And I sat in my car just drinking the coffee and watching the world go by. I'd also bought myself an Aussie pie, an Aussie pie, which is a very special kind of pie. It has minced beef and gravy and it's in a buttery kind of flaked pastry. If you ever come to Australia, I've got to tell you, us Aussies do a splendid meat pie. Make sure you try one. Anyway, the pie smelled really, really good, as you can imagine. And because I had my dog in the back of the car, I didn't want to torture her. And so I wound all the windows of my car down completely in the hopes that the aroma of the pie wouldn't get to her in the back of the car. I know that, it probably did, but at least there was a bit of breeze mixed up with it and it wasn't going to be too overwhelming. So when I'd finished my meal, I continued on our journey. Normally, I would have wound most of the windows back up again before I drove off, especially the front passenger window, because I didn't have a passenger with me. So why leave all the windows open all the way down? Because as I'm driving, it'll blow my hair all around. Then I can't even see where I'm going if that's the case. But on this particular occasion, for some inexplicable reason, I just can't think of why I didn't wind the windows down. I didn't wind the windows back up when I took off. So when I did drive off, I had all four windows completely wound down. Now that was really unusual. Maybe I didn't realize because my hair was in a ponytail or something and so it wasn't flapping around in the wind because that's really annoying when it, covers your eyes and everything. Maybe that's why I never even realized that I'd failed to wind up some of the windows. I'm still wondering why I never noticed that it would have been a bit cold. I mean, it was only spring. And so, yes, it was a beautiful day, but it wasn't, and it was sunny, but it wasn't a hot day because we didn't really have hot days until at least the middle of summer this year. It was just such an out of character thing for me to do to drive off without winding up some of my windows. Anyway, the most unlikely thing happened a few minutes later. I was driving at around 40 to 45 miles an hour down a country road. There was farmland on either side of my car, and mine was the only car on the road that I can remember. Suddenly, out of nowhere, a bullet traveled in through my driver window, right across my face, and it sped past me so fast and so close that I could hear and feel the whoosh of the air as it went past. I had some music playing at a kind of a medium volume, and I hadn't heard a gunshot or anything, but it was definitely a bullet. It wasn't a rock, and it wasn't anything. It wasn't a bug or anything. It was definitely a bullet. So it flew in through my driver's window, and then it disappeared out the front passenger window. It happened so fast that it took me a few seconds to register what had just happened. I remember that I continued driving for about 2 to 3 seconds, as I had been, because that's how long it took to sink in. But then when the moment did sink into my brain, I remember letting my foot ease on the accelerator and I quickly checked my mirrors and looked around to see if I could see anything. I couldn't see anything that I could make any sense out of. In the moment, there were no houses around, there were no cars, there were no people. It was just a stretch of road with one lane going in either direction. And there were there was also a row of intermittent, shrubs and trees and things on either side of the road, leading to slightly overgrown grass, shoulders, and then farm fencing. I mean, this was a really rural area. I was about 5 minutes away from a town that I knew, and it had a police station. So I went to report the incident at the police station. The police officer at reception was quite young, under 30. He would have been probably mid-20s, I guess. And he was very polite to me, but I felt a bit stupid. He said that someone would go and check the grassland area for a bullet, which was a strange thing to say. But honestly, he didn't even ask me to give him a precise location. He didn't ask for my name or anything. And embarrassingly, so, I kind of doubt that anyone went looking for a bullet. I actually don't think he believed me at all. He probably thought I was some crazy person that just, I don't know what he thought I'd be doing. But I told him what had happened. So I'd done my bit. And then I went about my business. I was a bit perplexed by the incident, but that's about it. Because, nothing happened. Nothing was damaged. I wasn't injured. So as I begin to discuss this whole concept of determinism, I can't help but wonder, was it predetermined that I would fail to wind up my windows that day? Because if I had wound up my windows after my lunch, this would have definitely changed the trajectory of the bullet. And perhaps it would have been just enough of a shift in that trajectory that I might be dead now. This is a real story. I've gone back to look at the area since then because obviously I'm curious. I actually think that perhaps one of the farmers or one of their kids or something was shooting rabbits or doing target practice or something. And perhaps they forgot that if you miss your target and are pointing your gun towards a road, that bullet is going to keep traveling until it hits something. I think it was probably one of those freak accidents of, innocently pointing a gun in the wrong direction and not using it safely. And I'm really grateful for the fact that nothing was damaged and I wasn't injured. But that doesn't explain why I did something out of character that day and was probably saved by this failure to do what I would normally do. Because normally I would never drive off with all of my windows all the way open. So was it predetermined? And if it was, then why? And who or what determined it? According to Robert Sapolsky's theories, my failure to wind up my windows was caused by previous events that created a knock-on effect over time, perhaps since the beginning of my time here in life. The day I was born, the time I was born, the kinds of food that my mother fed me as a baby, the color of my hair, how long it takes to brush every day, seemingly unrelated things in life, according to Robert Sapolsky, all led to this moment. If it wasn't for something like this incident, in which I acted completely out of character in a small but highly significant way, then I wouldn't actually take anything that Robert Sapolsky says seriously at all. Because I come from a mindset in which free will is an important aspect of reality. And what Robert Sapolsky is saying is because he's a scientist and he can't see the free will, then clearly it doesn't exist. He's also saying these things because he's written a book about it. And so it's in his best interest to promote whatever he's written in his book. I keep that in mind. But I just can't ignore the fact that something happened in a certain way and that it was very significant to my life. It may have actually been the reason why I'm still alive. And it didn't feel like free will. Leaving my windows open, it didn't feel like free will. It felt like fate. Or maybe I'm just pre-programmed to feel about it in this way. I don't know. So let's have a look at this concept of free will from another perspective. Firstly, let's make sure we actually understand what is meant by the term free will. Okay. So free will is when a person has an unimpeded or undetermined ability to choose from a variety of different options. The earliest examination of the concept of free will came from the ancient Greek philosopher Aristotle at around 4 BC. Aristotle didn't actually refer to the concept as being that of free will. In fact, he created 3 different theories that form the basis for what we believe free will to mean today. Aristotle's first theory relates to a person's general disposition and how this may influence their choices. Like an adventurous personality may take more risks, whereas a person with a reserved personality may choose from safer options. So, Aristotle's second theory relates to parameters such as what's materially possible or what is necessary. So, for example, whether or not we decide to breathe and simultaneously stay alive is not a reality that exists as a choice that we can make. If we want to live, then we have to breathe. It's a necessity. When it comes to what's materially possible, well, think about the person who wants to eat a steak for dinner, right? They want to have steak for dinner tonight. They could only choose to eat the steak if they had the steak. So if they didn't have the steak in their possession, they would first need to find some, whether they buy it or steal it or it's made available to them in some other way. But let's just say they decide to buy it. So if they decide to go buy some steak, first they would need the money to buy the steak. And without the money, they can't choose to buy it. And so on Aristotle's second theory involving the material possibilities, this creates limits on what free will can and can't do. You can't stop breathing and expect to live, and you can't eat steak if you haven't got any. Aristotle's third theory relates to fate. He claimed that everything in reality falls into one of 2 categories. Either it's true or it's false. If it's true, then according to Aristotle, it has always been true and will always be true. This is how he describes fate, or what we often think of now as destiny. An element of existence that never changes because it is a truth that can't be denied. If it's false, however, then it becomes a little murky. Does something exist because we think it exists? And if we aren't thinking it in a particular moment, does that mean that it doesn't exist in that moment? Aristotle really is the originator of any of the theories that people are talking about right now. Even when it comes to Robert Sapolsky's seemingly controversial book, in which he claims that free will doesn't exist. These are not new dilemmas and have been debated for thousands of years. So, for example, the Bible. Okay, so the Bible makes reference to freedoms having been bestowed upon humanity in a number of places specifically. And there are additional references to choices and decision-making within the Bible that imply an element of free will. For example, in Galatians 5:13, it says, I quote, "You, my brothers and sisters, were called to be free, but do not use your freedom to indulge the flesh. Rather, serve one another humbly in love." End quotes. This verse of the Bible appears to explain that humanity is given free will, but also the expectation, or perhaps more accurately, the hope of the Creator, is that humanity will use its free will in ways that support the collective and strive towards a spiritual enlightenment. Often, the Bible refers to the Creator as the entity that determines the fate of all humanity, whether as individuals or in the collective sense. However, there are also examples that are kind of the opposite in the Bible as well. For example, Proverbs 16:9 states, and I quote, "In their hearts, humans plan their course, but the Lord establishes their steps." Unquote. This verse implies that the choices within reality are made by the Creator, but humanity ultimately decides the overarching reality. This sounds a little bit like a life contract. So, in the spiritual sense, there is a theory about life contracts. So, let's make sure we understand what that is too. A life contract is an agreement made by the soul of a person, which in life on earth will consist of various lessons that they agree to learn from that life. The soul agrees to strive towards fulfillment of these life lessons, but does not choose how the lessons will be presented during their material life. So let's just say, for example, that a particular soul agrees to learn the lessons of life arising from living a materially prosperous life. And so what they do is they agree to be born into money and material wealth. And then they spend their entire life on the material plane, rich and successful and maybe even famous. But the Creator decides to prevent them from ever being happy because their life lesson in this respect is that money doesn't create happiness. Spiritual fulfillment creates happiness. Maybe the soul learns the lesson, or maybe they don't. The question of this is an entirely different episode. So far, it sounds as though the ancient wisdoms combine determinism, free will, and fate together, and that reality is a combination of all three. So let's have a look at free will from a different perspective, from a different religious text. Okay? All right. So you've probably heard me refer to the Book of Zohar before. The Book of Zohar is a mystical book which contains the wisdom of the Kabbalah faith. And Kabbalah is a sort of a mystical version of early Judaism. So I've mentioned it in previous episodes because it's one of the ancient wisdoms that I've taken a real interest in lately. It has very interesting ways of interpreting life and reality. So the Book of Zohar describes free will as being something that occurs in like a corridor kind of environment. We are permitted to travel down the corridor. There are many doors in this corridor, and we can open as many of them as we like. And we can do it in any order that we like. We can also travel down the corridor quickly or slowly. We can jump, we can skip, we can run, we can do it, quietly or loudly, and we can eat cookies all the way down there or scream and yell and cry our eyes out as we go. In fact, we have no idea what exists or if anything actually does exist beyond the corridor. Our entire concept of reality is confined to the corridor. So we can do what we like in this corridor. We just can't be aware of anything outside of the corridor. So according to the Kabbalistic faith, free will belongs to us, and we have the freedom to use it at our discretion. But free will is confined to a reality that has boundaries like a corridor. And those boundaries sound a little bit like Robert Sapolsky's idea about determinism. And also Aristotle's ideas about fate and destiny. So let's look at one more ancient wisdom just to do a, comparison. Bible, Zohar. Okay, I haven't covered anything from the Islamic wisdom before, so let's take a look at that. The Quran. Okay, the Quran speaks of humanity's free will in quite specific ways. Firstly, nothing in the Quran can be accurately quoted in isolation of other verses, so I've got to keep that in mind. And I wouldn't want to misinterpret any single verse. However, let's see what we can find there. What is evident from the Quran are a number of specific themes. For example, there are verses in the Quran that expressly state things like, quote, do whatever you will. And also, there are quotes that humans are free to aim for specific goals, choose between alternatives, and exercise their free will. The Quran also says that humanity has the freedom to believe or not believe in a particular religious doctrine. One phrase in the Quran states, and I quote, there is no compulsion in the deen. Well, the word deen has a complex set of definitions. So to translate that, It relates to authority, religion, submission, obedience, and the relationship between those who claim spiritual authority and those who are expected to submit to that authority. So, in essence, it appears that what the Quran is saying in that verse is that there is freedom for humanity to act with sovereignty. And sovereignty is just another word for freedom and self-governance, or free will. The Quran also acknowledges the same parameters that Aristotle did over 2,000 years ago, the parameters of fate and determinism. So it looks like the various wisdoms of the religious wisdoms all have different ways of expressing the concept of free will. But generally, there's an agreement between them that reality is comprised of three different components. Firstly, there's fate or destiny, which relates to the overarching pre-planned outcomes for all things. And then, of course, the second thing is determinism, which relates to what is materially possible or what is necessary for reality to exist. And then finally, the third thing is free will, which relates to our freedom to choose whatever we like once fate and determinism has been taken into account. I find that the easiest way of remembering the concept of free will is the Kabbalistic version of explanation, the explanation that life is a corridor and that we can do what we like inside the corridor. But regardless of what we choose to do, we're still confined to the corridor. So let's go a little bit deeper now, because this takes us into the realm of quantum physics. And isn't it funny how ancient wisdoms and religions often cross over into the concepts of science? I think it's a little bit sad, actually, that science, and that includes these scientists, for example, even like Robert Sapolsky, try so hard to separate their knowledge from the spiritual or philosophical concepts. That might be why it's taking scientists such a long time to figure, really basic things out, like what is reality, what is consciousness. It should be easy to get to that. Perhaps if they relaxed a bit and dabbled in other ways of seeing things, they might discover that the answers lie somewhere in the in-between, somewhere outside of the empirical realms of science. But anywho, let's take a look at what the quantum scientists have to say. Now, to be clear, I've chosen quantum physics over any other kind of science because quantum physics specifically deals with the smallest possible element that exists within other elements. So, as the smallest possible element, it works collectively to create reality. And free will is a concept within our reality. So, it's a good idea to look at it from the root or the core, and therefore from the smallest originating place. Now, there are three very different ideas in quantum physics that relate to free will. The first is a theory of superdeterminism. So, superdeterminism states that nothing is random and that everything is predetermined, kind of like what Robert Sapolsky says. It states that even when we perceive ourselves to be making a choice, we are simply doing what we are predetermined or pre-programmed to do, and that everything that occurs is measurable and predictable. Everything. One particular quantum physicist by the name of Sabine Hossenfelder, I think she's German, has quite boldly stated that free will is illogical and incoherent nonsense. Those are her words. I hope this doesn't sound submissive of Sabine Hossenfelder, but I would just like to say that if free will is illogical and incoherent and nonsense, and if everything is absolutely and undeniably predetermined, then I hope they aren't paying her very much money because she clearly was dropped into her role. It was predetermined long before she was even conceived, and even before she was an idea in her parents' mind or a twinkle in her dad's eye. She has accomplished nothing of her own doing, and she should immediately forego her wealth and her reputation immediately, because otherwise she might start to look as though she's achieved it through her own decision-making and free will. I'm only kidding. I'm being cheeky, but I do feel a bit of a sting at being told that I'm being illogical and incoherent and nonsensical when I believe in free will. And I hope that one day, I'm still being cheeky. I hope that one day an alien knocks on Sabine's door and personally tells her that she's wrong. I think that'll fix her. Then again, she might just call the alien illogical, incoherent, and nonsensical and slam the door in his face. Who knows? Anyway, some people just can't be convinced of anything. The thing about science is, the whole concept of science is that if you can't see it, it doesn't exist. And we must keep that in mind. Just because you can't see it doesn't mean you won't be able to see it someday in the future. So the second theory in quantum physics that relates to free will is called free will theorem, which states that if humanity has free will, then every particle that's being studied or seen by humans must always also have free will. In other words, free will is something that either does or doesn't exist. So if I'm looking at this pen because I want to, then the pen also has the free will. And it must simultaneously exist for anything that relates to the thing that the free will is apportioned to. Now, this theory was a little bit difficult to understand, but I think I might get it. So let's give it a shot and see if maybe a quantum physicist gets in touch with me to see whether or not I've got it right or I've got it wrong, or if I'm just sort of being illogical and incoherent. I don't know. So it sounds like the second theory of free will theorem is that when I stand on the beach and look out into the ocean, for the time that I'm standing and staring at the waves and hearing the ocean sounds around me, and for as long as I can feel the sand between my toes or the gentle breeze around me, then for those moments, the particles that make up the ocean, the wind and the sand and the sounds that I can hear are also choosing to exist. Just like when I hold up this pen to look at it, it's choosing to exist. Like I'm having an intimate relationship with my surroundings. And we've agreed to come together for that moment. But then if I decide to turn around and head back to the car and leave the beach, whatever I lose sight of in the moment also decides to no longer exist. So when I cast my pen to the side and don't look at it, it no longer exists. This second theory describes a reality that requires everything involved in the reality to play a part and to form a kind of relationship with everything else. When it describes it in a scientific way, it sounds a bit bizarre. But when you say it in a relationshipy kind of way, I think it sounds kind of beautiful. Having a relationship with everything around you, whether it's an animate object or a person or inanimate, or, you know, my microphone, my coffee cup, the coffee inside it, having that intimate relationship does sound very beautiful to me. And it makes me feel connected to everything in reality. So the third theory in quantum physics is called the strong free will theorem. And it's based on the combination of quantum mechanics and Einstein's theory of relativity. Basically, this theory sounds like it's acknowledged by scientists, but not entirely provable yet, which is kind of weird, isn't it? Very unscientific. It's based on the belief that things don't always make sense in the practical way that science operates, but that when something happens, it causes other things to happen. I don't know about you, but this sounds a little like quantum physicists are trying to hedge their bets, just in case maybe an alien does come knocking on their door one day. It was difficult to consider it to be a science theory, but apparently it is. In a recent episode, I talked about the concept of whether our memories are stored in our hearts rather than our brains, and whether there is a crossover between spirituality, memories, and our sense of individual identity. During this discussion, I referenced an idea from the Book of Zohar, in which the existence of a human soul is described. At the time, I wouldn't have believed that I was necessarily talking about free will, but perhaps I was, because there seems to be a link between the concept of the human soul and how it relates to our journey on life here on earth, according to the Book of Zohar. So the book of Zohar, which is the Kabbalistic text, explains that there is only one soul in existence, only one, and that we are not actually separated from each other with separate souls. Instead, we are divided so that we may each experience an earthly reality. And the purpose of our life is to return home and to return back to our single whole soul. We're born with a perception of having our own unique soul. That's our perception, but it's only a perception. It's not the reality. And what is reality is that we each have our own unique desire as to how we should journey on our journey towards home and how we should achieve that fulfillment. So our desire of is unique to us rather than our soul. The desire that we have is what dictates to us what our choices should be. And so, with this in mind, imagine that you are in that corridor. The corridor is the only reality, and it only travels to a single place. The destination is the one and only soul that exists for all of us, regardless of how we get there. We are temporarily divided from each other, but only in our perception. And each of us is given a unique desire, which is the fuel that gets us home at the end of our journey of fulfillment. The corridor will get us home no matter what we choose to do and no matter our desire. It's up to us to harness our desire and to translate it into our choices. Those choices are our free will, which allows us to walk or to run or to skip towards the end of the corridor. We can do it quietly, loudly, happily, sadly, in kindness or anger or hatred or generosity or love or loneliness. We can eat crackers all the way or drink ourselves into oblivion as we go. We can enjoy the corridor or be fearful of everything that we see. It's all up to us. But regardless of what we choose at any moment in time and for any reason, we will still be confined to our corridor and we will still find our fulfillment because that is our purpose. I know I've said it before, but the more I learn about the book of Zohar, the more I find it to be quite a curious source of wisdom. It's almost impossible to understand the book of Zohar. It really is. It's like reading one great big riddle. But when a message does become clear, it suddenly becomes so clear that you find yourself wondering why you never thought of it before. It's a really fascinating book. So, we've looked at free will from the perspective of ancient wisdoms, religions, and also science. So, okay, let's switch gears a little bit and look at how astrology fits into the concept of free will as another sort of esoteric example. Astrology is the study of planetary movements and how everything falls within the general parameters defined by the positioning of stars and planets inside a kind of a grid or a pattern relating to the zodiac. The overarching principles of astrology are in agreement with the overarching principles of religion and even some elements of modern science. In astrology, a person who is born at a certain time of the day in a certain geographic location will have aspects of destiny and determination associated with their existence. The planets and the stars will, to some degree, provide a framework for reality. But the person can use the framework to assess their strengths, weaknesses, and their challenges and their opportunities. And so, with this knowledge, free will can be added to the equation so that the person can utilize their strengths and their opportunities to lessen or reduce the chances of any challenges or weaknesses. Astrology operates on the principle of everything in reality being a form of energy that can be altered, thereby altering the reality. Tarot works in very much the same way. Tarot measures the energy of the moment and what is likely, but it's up to the person's decision making or free will as to whether they wanted to continue on this likely path or if perhaps a decision can be made to slightly change the energy and therefore change the likely outcome. So, obviously, this is an oversimplification of both astrology and tarot, but at least we get the general gist of things. Both of them work on the principle of the measurement of the current energy and then adding your free will to determine whether momentum is given to the existing energy or whether it can be used to divert the energy into a new direction. So, also, more paranormal here, and let's move into a completely different area of the paranormal. There are people within this concept of the paranormal who claim to channel messages from advanced beings, whether they are referring to celestial beings such as angels or spirit guides, or perhaps extraterrestrial beings. And while we can't be sure if any of these people really are challenging an otherworldly entity, there are some quite profound messages coming from a small number of individuals who claim to do so. Messages that make sense in a very simple way, even though the source cannot be scientifically proven. I mean, I believe in a lot of things, right? But I tend to be very conservative when it comes to my belief in channeling. And the reason for that is that I've rarely heard any profound messages coming from a supposed channel. They might close their eyes and shift about in a way to appear as though a foreign entity is moving through their body. Their voice might change, it might get louder or softer. They might even develop an accent or lose an accent or speak in a particular way. But after the entity that they claim has channeled them has come and gone, more often than not, I haven't learnt anything new. It's something that's already been said here on Earth. And so it really makes me wonder, why would a celestial or extraterrestrial being make all of the trouble of channeling through an earthly being just to say earthly things that we can look up elsewhere on the internet? Some of these channeling messages don't really resonate with me. And so I'm skeptical because I don't feel as though I'm learning anything new from these people. But there is one guy that I've come across who I think has kind of knocked me into a different kind of mindset. He claims to be channeling an extraterrestrial hybrid, and I've been trying to see as much of his messaging as I can find. And I'm not actually sure whether this is the entity that he claims to channel is a hybrid or maybe a humanoid from the future or something, but it's an extraterrestrial based entity. And the messages that he's been claiming to channel have been coming for around 40 years. And I would say that he is the most convincing example of channeling that I've ever seen, given that I'm skeptical of that. And I'm talking about a fellow in California called Daryl Anker and the entity that he channels that goes by the name of Bashar. So let's assume that Bashar is an extraterrestrial hybrid or humanoid or otherworldly being from another otherworldly place and time. And let's just see what he has to say about free will. Because he has, over the years, said quite a few things about the subject of free will. And he's quite unusually, for channeling, always been very concise and very practical. Bashar, the channeled entity through Daryl Anker, offers intriguing insights into free will. So let's explore his perspective. According to Bashar, there is a higher purpose of life, which is that we must each live as our true selves to the best of our ability and to live each moment as fully as possible. Now, this aligns with the idea that free will allows us to make choices that shape our individual experiences. Bashar also emphasizes that love and relationships are about being authentic, experiencing personal growth, and making conscious choices. He encourages each person to follow what gives them a sense of real passion and excitement, and to support other people too, as a way of creating meaningful connections that feed our higher self and enhance our journey of self-discovery. Bashar says that we always have free will, and the freedom to choose and to make our choices. But interestingly, I think he has at some point also talked about free will being contained in a corridor of some kind. And that's the kind of thing that gets my attention when I get crossover. Very similar analogy to the way in which it's described in the Kabbalistic faith or the Book of Zohar. And of course, the way that Bashar describes following our passion as being one of the things that we in humanity must do as part of our life, it sounds so similar to the Book of Zohar and that Kabbalistic description of how our desire takes us home to our collective soul. Different language, but it's things like that that make the Bashar channel a unique channel. For someone who is skeptical like me, there's a lot of similarities there. There is, of course, a crossover between the faith-based theories of free will and the quantum reality theories of space and time. And I've chosen Bashar as a paranormal example because he explains it really succinctly and kind of marries it all together in a way that leaves me wondering why everyone doesn't learn this as a simple explanation of life when they're children or on the very first day of school. Bashar explains that our reality and our choices are interrelated. What we believe is what is true for us. And if we believe that everyone is evil, then in our reality, everyone is evil. If we believe that we're poor and have no opportunities, then we will live in a reality where we are poor and have no opportunities. If we believe that we're happy and that life is wonderful and that we have control over what happens next in our lives, then we will be happy, life will be wonderful, and we will have control over what happens next in our lives, because that is the reality that we will have chosen to live in. One of the areas where the messages from Bashar cross over into the messages for the science relate to this belief in reality. You know, I mentioned the quantum physics theory that states that for as long as I'm acknowledging that this pen exists because of my free will, the pen chooses to exist because we have formed a relationship of some kind. And so we're part of the same reality. What Bashar states is that we determine our reality by the things that we deeply believe in, wholeheartedly, genuinely believe in, not try to convince ourselves to believe in, but we actually, at the core of our being, believe in. That is our reality. And so what Bashar states is that if we believe in a reality and someone else believes in a different reality, as time moves on, those realities will separate and we may lose an awareness of each other. And I found that to be really fascinating because it kind of takes the science discussion into something even further. And that's the kind of profound messaging that sets Bashar apart. All of this seems to boil down to a combination of three things that seem to govern everything. It's true for the ancient philosophers, it's true for religion and faith, it's true for science, and it seems also to be true for the paranormal. The three governing features of reality appear to be a combination of destiny, determination, and free will. Destiny is like the overall objective of life. It can be described as fulfillment, enlightenment, self-discovery, a return to the whole, the soul contract, or a return to the collective. I guess one of the reasons why it's called so many things or perceived in so many different ways is that it is proving its own theory. Regardless of how we interpret the objective of life, it takes each of us to the same place in the end, regardless of what we call it. It takes us to the light at the end of the corridor. Determinism sets the rules and the structure by which we're permitted to travel down the corridor. The rules may relate to societal laws and traditions, or our individual beliefs, whether by religious design or something more unstructured and spiritual, or even relating to a lack of belief in anything outside the physical realm. Like that German physicist, Sabine Hossenfelder, who got under my skin, who believes that anyone who doesn't agree with her is being illogical, incoherent, and nonsensical. She's still likely to show up one day at the end of the corridor. And so either she'll be right one day or we'll be right. I don't know. But you know what? I'm going to tell you, I have a feeling that we are going to be right. But then again, of course I do. Determinism may also relate to our sense of identity, our moral code, the lessons we've learnt in the past, our fears and our anxieties. Pretty much anything that we believe gives us permission to peek around at things as we travel down this corridor towards the light. Now, that corridor towards the light and the predetermined everything that goes with it is where Robert Sapolsky is sitting. But you know, that third concept also appears to be true, and that is the free will concept. Free will is everything that's left after destiny and determination have been taken into account. We can run or jump or crawl towards the light at the end of the corridor. We can travel down that corridor any way we want to, but ultimately we will travel. And at the end, there will be the light. And I tend to believe that the light is that single soul, which is our home, the home of the collective that will be there waiting for us, regardless of how we complete the journey or the passion that we follow, if you use Bashar's language, or the desire that propels us, if you use the Kabbalistic language. It's for us to acknowledge our desires or our passion and excitement and transform them into our life choices. So with that in mind, let me give you a final quote from Bashar. He says that when it comes to our free will, we have each made our own choices, which provides us with our own reality. So the next time you feel angry or hurt or anxious or frightened or bored, or, I don't know, just fill in the blank. But every time you feel a certain way, just remind yourself of your own free will and say these words, which I think I found quite simple, but very, very effective. Say these words. I feel this emotion because I have chosen to feel this emotion, because I believe that this emotion will serve my life's purpose. It's a wonderful quote by Bashar, because as soon as you say it to yourself, you realize that unless the emotion is actually serving a purpose for you, then you're wasting a valuable life on the wrong emotion. Because our emotions feed our intellect, which feeds our beliefs, and then ultimately feeds our reality. And it's stuff like that also that sets a person like Daryl Anker and his otherworldly friend Bashar apart from most channelers. It's a message which is so simple and so easy to digest. It makes you believe that it must come from an ascendant place. So let me repeat that to you again, because ever since I heard it, I've been using it and I find it really effective. When I find myself in an emotion of some kind that is an uncomfortable one, happiness is wonderful, but let's just say I'm angry at something, then I will stop for a moment consciously and I will say to myself quietly, I'm feeling angry because I choose to feel angry, because I believe that being angry is going to serve my life's purpose at this moment. And as soon as I say that to myself, I think, well, no, it's not. And instantly, I'm no longer angry. Try it. It really works. It really works. So after all of this, having looked at the paranormal, having looked at the ancient wisdoms, having looked at science and quantum physics in particular, and having thought about Robert Sapolsky's book and the concept that there's no such thing as free will, I do have to say that I disagree. I do believe that there are three different levels. Perhaps only one of them is visible to the scientific eye, and that's the reason why scientists such as Robert Sapolsky believe in that, because, nothing that they can't see exists, according to some scientists. But the concept of destiny is that everything belongs to something bigger, and that there is a grand plan out there, and we're all just cogs in the wheel or drops in the ocean. And then this determinism aspect is the rules for the journey. That you must have a body, and you must be able to breathe, and things like that. And you can only work with what's possible. Like, you can only eat steak if you have steak, and you can only have steak if you've bought steak, and you can only buy steak if you have the money for the steak. Those things fall within determinism. But once you've dealt with the destiny and the determinism, now you're in the corridor, and you can do whatever you like in that corridor, because regardless of what you do, there's a light at the end of that corridor, and everyone ends up in the light. Isn't that lovely? So if you'd like to delve a little deeper into the spiritual side of what I do, then check out my YouTube channel. It's called Ellie Dreams Down Under. Every week, you'll find bonus content relating to the show. There's also tarot, horoscopes, and the analysis of people, circumstances, and events. A new video airs every day, rain or shine. I even had a total knee replacement about a year ago, but the videos just kept coming the whole time I was in hospital and everything. It never stops because I'm a machine and I can't help myself. You can also find me on Facebook, Instagram, Threads, Patreon, and Shopify. All of my social media links can be found at the Ellie Dreams Down Under channel on YouTube. Also, thank you very much to everyone who's joined me today on one of KJRA's broadcasting platforms. That includes Facebook, X, Rumble, and pretty much all of your podcast forums. But the best place to hang out with like-minded watchers, experiencers, spiritualists, and weirdos of the best variety, like me, is at KJRA. Just click on live.kjradb.com and use promo code Ellie, that's me, for 30% off your subscription. So my name is Ellie, and that's it for today. It's been a pleasure. Until next time.